Well, what did they say? They said that the K through 12, the Common Core standards are identical across all states. Do you remember when we looked at that chart and all the colors matched up? They cannot subtract a standard. They cannot edit a standard. They can add 15% more. Why can they add? Because every state has little quirks in their laws. One is all the states that says, you will teach U.S. and fill in the name of my state, history. And that's by statute. All the state legislatures years ago said you have to teach the history of the state you live in. That's statutory, so it can't be moved. So they had to make room for that in the Common Core standards. But when we looked at the comparison, they're all the same because they have to be. They can't change them. They can't edit. They can't subtract because they took money saying they would do it all the same. Go ahead. Go ahead. Read that. Go ahead. Pennsylvania said, yep, we're going to adopt these standards by August of 2010. And once the state board adopts them, they become the standards for every school district and every charter school in the state. No school district had a choice and no charter school had a choice. Once the state board said we did it, everybody did it. Go ahead. Go ahead. How are they going to make sure? Pennsylvania has what's called a Standards Aligned System portal. That's a web-based, it has curriculum in it, it has the standards in it, you can access it, and then you can get curriculum to match the standards. And what they said was, we're going to change that portal so it's not just teachers talking to teachers, it's everything in it will be moved to be aligned with the Common Core standards. Go ahead. Pennsylvania, in fact, submitted their plan. Remember, every state had to say the plan. So they just didn't say, we'll make it by August 2nd. They had to submit a plan to tell the feds how. Well, if you read the plan, they say, well, as long as we receive the standards by June 2nd, receive the standards. I thought they wrote them. If you write something, you don't receive it. If you receive it, you didn't write it. I've written 6 books. I didn't receive any of them. I wrote them. I've read Dickens. I received the book from somebody. Pennsylvania said, when we received the standards, this was written before they received them. So they hadn't seen them yet. We don't know what they are. We haven't received them yet. As long as we receive them by June, go ahead. We're going to go through the process, go ahead. So we're receiving them by June, go ahead. And again. And we're going to vote to adopt them on July the 1st. And in fact, they did. So in May, they said, we haven't seen them yet, but as long as we get them by June, we're going to adopt them in 30 days. We're going to give you a fair trial before we hang you. Pennsylvania promised to adopt standards they had not seen, and they promised to adopt them in total. They didn't promise to edit them. Now, the law says there was supposed to be public comment and a process. They kind of circumvented that. They shortcutted the process and put it in place, and they did vote. They implemented the plan. They did vote to adopt those standards on July 1st, 2010. They are the standards in the state of Pennsylvania. Go ahead. Now, the feds said, well, okay, but yeah, the state can do it, but you know, school districts sometimes, they're not real cooperative with our plans. These local school districts, they want local control. We don't really like that. So how are you going to assure us that every school district is in fact going to do this? And what Pennsylvania said, no, go back one. What Pennsylvania said is our school districts can have 2 options. They can just kind of get dragged along, or they can become a participating district, meaning we'll give them extra money. If they're a participating district, they have to sign a memorandum of understanding. It has no opt-out clause. Once you get in, you can't get out. And the memorandum says you have to do all of Race to the Top. Remember when the stabilization, the state had to do all 4? Well, every school district has to do everything in the Race to the Top application. You can't pick and choose. Go ahead. What did they have to do? Among other things, they had to implement curriculum that matched the standards. They had to change their curriculum to go with the standards. Go ahead. Go ahead. They also had to make data available to researchers. That was mandated. Go ahead. Now, Pennsylvania said, oh, no. The curriculum is determined solely by the local school districts and their personnel. Solely by the local school districts. They've handed this sheet out to every member of the Pennsylvania House and Senate. They've handed it to school districts. This is their fact sheet. This is the very first section. Well, is that what they told Washington? We were a finalist in the Race to the Top application, and if you were a finalist state, you got to go to Washington in person and defend your grant application. So Pennsylvania, in fact, did send people to Washington, and she said, that Washington said, well, how do we know everybody's doing it? Because you only have 122 out of 501 school districts that have signed this memorandum. And she said, well, yeah, but in that 122 school districts are Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg and Erie, and they're the four biggest. She also said, our statewide reforms are going to affect every school district, not just participating districts. Our student-level data system is available to everybody. Our SAS portal, updated for Common Core, is available to everybody. And the Washington reviewer said, okay, well, just so I understand, when you say available, do you mean available or do you mean required? And this is what she said. For non-participating school districts, the SAS portal, which is our standards and our model curriculum, that's available to school districts. But everybody has to teach to the standards. That's required. And everybody has to implement our high school end of course exams. That's required. So in order for them to successfully get to their high school exams, which will be aligned to the Common Core, they're going to need to access all that stuff. Our experience is that when we have made mandatory things available, pretty much everybody's using them. So you may volunteer to do the mandatory thing. Kind of like, I have 6 children, and you mothers have all probably said this. Johnny, would you take the trash out? Can Johnny actually say no? No. He may volunteer to do the mandatory thing. No is not an option. School districts could volunteer to do the mandatory thing. Go ahead. In the grant, what they said, go ahead, was that they're going to develop staff to use Common Core, and in the SAS portal, the teachers will be given summative and formative assessments. What are those? Summative assessments, that's your end of course exam. We used to call those final exams. Formative assessments, that's your weekly spelling test. So every test in the classroom all along the way will be connected to Common Core. So how would you pass those weekly tests if you didn't teach the words on the list? Let's pull that a little bit out of educational terms. The state standard is, see this chocolate cake? Here's my chocolate cake. It's an amazing chocolate cake. You're every student in the state of Pennsylvania. Your assessment is, at the end of your course, you have to make a chocolate cake that is the exact same texture and the exact same taste as my chocolate cake. You can use any recipe you want. But when you're done, your chocolate cake has to be identical in every way to my chocolate cake. In the end, how many recipes will there be? 1, because otherwise the cake won't be the same. And now if the state says, like, you can figure this out by yourself, but see, here's this recipe. And I put it on the website, and it's free to the school district. Is everybody going to use it? Yeah. Because you have to make your cake look like my cake. And I'm giving you the recipe. Here you go. Go ahead. Go ahead. And in fact, that's what Pennsylvania told Washington. They said every school district in the state must update its instructional program to reflect the new standards. They must use the state-mandated new summative final exams. We anticipate that given the limited resources most districts have for curriculum improvements, the overwhelming majority will rely on our SAS portal to bring their instructional program online with the new standards. You have to change your curriculum. We know the districts don't have any money. We're giving it to you for free. Your recipe has to look like my recipe. And I just happen to have it here for you. And they told Washington, we know that's what they're going to do. How many curricula will there be? 1. Go ahead. They also said that they would put all the assessments online so that the teachers could use, they don't even have to write their own test, we're going to give you everything. So it's a complete package that every district is giving, that the state is giving every district. Go ahead. They also said that they're going to be diagnosing student strengths and weaknesses, so additional interventions for children who don't meet the standards can be brought to bear. Go ahead. And again. And just in case holding the teachers accountable isn't enough, we can hold the local education agencies, that's your school districts and your charter schools, accountable as well, intervening as necessary. Now, I went looking into what was some of the interventions, and in one of the appendixes to this application, one of the possible interventions is firing the principal and half the staff if a school does not comply. So it's a lot of intervention for non-compliant schools. Go ahead. There we go. Now, remember the state had to say how they were going to pay for this. Part of what they told Washington is, well, we'll move money around. We'll coordinate money, we'll reallocate money, and we'll repurpose education funds. Reallocate, I take it from point A and move it to point B. Where was point A? We don't know that yet. When I showed this to some members of the Pennsylvania House and Senate, they went, wait, we allocated that money by statute for a particular thing. What do you mean they're moving it around? Well, they told Washington they were going to move it around. And how much is this going to cost, and what are they going to spend it on? This is their budget. Go ahead. And again. They're going to hire a project director, 2 program directors, one for teacher quality, one for the SAS and use of data. Go ahead. And again. They're going to hire another director for the state charter school office and another for the state turnaround office. Again and again. They're going to hire 21 management staff. Go ahead. And again. They're going to create a research consortium and hire resident scholars to conduct the research, but they haven't told us how many of those there will be yet. Go ahead. And again. They're going to hire 220 additional staff at the IU to go and train everybody. Go ahead. And again. And they're going to hire external service providers, but we don't know how many of those there will be yet either. And how much will this cost? Well, go ahead. And again. They said they needed $400 million in race to the top money. Go ahead. And again. They were going to take $140 million in school improvement funds, and they were going to move $2.6 billion in state monies, and that was what would be necessary and sufficient to adopt this. Now, when the state board took the March 2000 regulations in front of the review commission to get them finally approved, they said that this would be free. And the state board went, tee-hee, go back and give us a real number. They told Washington it would cost $3.14 billion because you had $2.6 billion and $400 million and $140 million, and you have $3.14 billion. That's a lot of money. Hardly free. Go ahead. Additionally, go ahead. Every school district is going to have to say how they're going to come up with the additional money for signing bonuses, for additional teachers, for all these additional interventions and services. Remember the analyzing students' strengths and weaknesses with additional stuff if they don't meet the standards. That's expensive. We don't know how much that will cost because every school district will have to bear the burden of those additional figures. That's on top of the $3.14 billion. Go ahead, and again. They said that they're going to build these end-of-course exams in English, math, science, and history. English, math, science, and history. I thought there were only standards in English and math. So how do we have exams in science and history if no standards exist in science and history? Or do they exist and they just haven't told us yet? Go ahead, and again. Pennsylvania built the data system. We have identifiers for students and teachers. Go ahead. Now, I went to a training session for Common Core conducted by the IU. These are the documents they handed out. It was a picture. I took a picture of a PowerPoint. So the quality isn't the best because I was using what I had to work with. This is actually what they handed out. Go ahead. Now remember we heard about Rigor, all those rigorous standards? Go ahead. Rigor, approaching mathematics with a disposition to accept challenge and apply effort. Go ahead. And again. Rigor is not difficult like calculus is difficult. Remember, these are standards for every child. The state is not mandating that the school districts teach. The state is mandating that every child learn these standards. The child will. It's a mandate from the state to the child. So can I mandate standards for every child? Yes, I can, as long as I put the standards where I think the lowest can reach them. Let me give you an example. Stand up. Everybody stand up. Wiggle your tushy while you're up there. This is vocal performance. When you can meet the standard, you can sit down, but you cannot sit down until you can meet the standard. Are you ready? Luciano Pavarotti. Anybody who can sing as well as Pavarotti, who was considered the greatest tenor of the 20th century, can sit down. I've yet to have anybody sit. I don't know. Soloist with the New York Met. Chorus member with the New York Met. Soloist with the Regional Symphony. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. Soloist with the church choir. Sings in the church choir. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find the bucket. Oh, I still got a few people standing there.
Oh, I just stood up.
Oh.
because I was pissed off before, and I'm now getting angry. And I'm agreeing with you. So you're right on the mark, and I stood up because I objected to your standardization. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, now, I am a teacher in a classroom. I am responsible to make sure that every child reaches the standard. Nothing happens if they go beyond the standard. They only have to reach it. Where am I going to spend all my time? I'm going to spend my time with Mr. Can't Carry a Bucket over there, getting him up to sings in the shower and enjoys it. What happens to the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti? Okay, now vocal performance is kind of fun. What happens if it's math? Go ahead. The high school math standard in this system is Algebra 1. That is the high school graduation math standard in this system. That is all they have to pass to graduate. And when we were at this training session and that surfaced, a bunch of teachers went, whoa, 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 excuse me? I read that wrong, right? That didn't say Algebra 1. That's all you have to do to graduate? And the response was, well, you know, if you have a career, this is college and career ready. For a career in a service job, you don't need any more than Algebra 1, do you? Now think about this. If you are living in the Mount Lebanon, Fox Chapel, High Spire school district, do you think those parents are going to let their children stop at Algebra 1? No, not even if they have to pay for the teachers themselves. But what about if you are in Philadelphia, or inner city Pittsburgh, or inner city Harrisburg, and in this system you have to guarantee a 93% graduation rate, and all your kids have to do to graduate is pass Algebra 1? Where will the standard be? Algebra 1. What do the children in Bryn Mawr and Fox Chapel and High Spire look like? And what do the children in inner city Philadelphia and inner city Pittsburgh look like? There's a very ugly word for this. And if it's a standard to the child, and you happen to have parents who say, yeah, I don't care if that's the standard, you're going to go beyond it, but you don't have to have parents in any school district who are saying you're going to go beyond it, why would the child go beyond it? So even in the suburban school districts, over time, you will see fewer things at a higher level because kids stop where they have to go. We've all raised kids. What do I got to do to fill in the blank? So what is the effect of this? It's very ugly. It is, in fact, a dumbing down. And when the Senate Education Committee asked about this, the proponent of these standards said, well, yeah, because this is the floor. We're trying to work on the floor. High school is not supposed to be about the floor. It's supposed to be about the ceiling. It's supposed to tell kids your past does not have to determine your future. We used to say school districts are mandated to provide opportunity standards, this many years of math and science and English and history, opportunity standards that were at the highest level, not achievement standards at the lowest level. This fundamentally restructures how we think about education without even having a conversation. And it is truly an ugly restructuring. Go ahead. Now we moved to English after that. Now I have to tell you, I went to this thing saying I'm going to sit in the back and be quiet. I'm an FBI, full-blooded Irish, and my husband says you can always tell an Irish girl, but you can't tell her much. And I couldn't be quiet at this point. So what they were talking about in the language standards is, well, we don't want to be difficult. We want it to be depth of knowledge. And so we got two examples. The old example, you read a story about a baker, and the old question was, the baker most likely behaves as he does because he lacks talent, popularity, success, or generosity. The new standard, what you can't really see, is which sentence below best tells us that the baker lacks generosity. And she said, see, that's more depth of knowledge, at which point I could not be quiet. And I said, no, no, you're wrong. The first one is more depth of knowledge. Because in the first one, you have to read the story. You have to look at how the baker behaved. You have to analyze how the baker behaved, and then draw a conclusion about your analysis. In the second one, you don't even have to read the story, because they give you 4 sentences. Pick one. How's that more depth of knowledge? It's a whole different barometer of what we're measuring. Go ahead. What they said was, well, we're going to balance. So by the time you're in 12th grade, you're only reading 30% of literature and 70% of informational. And when I read through all the federal documents and they define informational, menus is one of the examples. That's hard. Maybe it's in French. Presidential statements, laws, technical manuals, those are informational documents. Some historical documents, 30% literature. And what teachers say is, oh, I can only do 30% literature. I can't really read a novel. I can only read excerpts from things. I can't actually read the novel. Why does that matter? Because Western culture is transmitted through our literature. Abraham Lincoln introduced Harriet Beecher Stowe once as the woman who began the Civil War. She wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. She put a face on slavery. Anytime that there's a survey done about the greatest hero in literature or the movies, it's funny, my 19-year-old asked me this the other night, who's the greatest hero? And I said, well, Atticus Finch. Now, he's 19, so he was really astounded I knew anything, because, you know, at 19, parents aren't very bright. And he said, wow, everybody said that. Well, of course everybody said that. If you ever read To Kill a Mockingbird, of course Atticus Finch is the greatest hero that ever lived. Because it was moral courage. But if you never read it, you missed the greatest hero. Our culture is transmitted through our literature. Without it, we do not help our children access the better part of themselves. Let me give you an example. You all have heard the lifeboat story? 10 people in a lifeboat, only 9 will fit. Who do you throw out of the lifeboat? And you get a demographic of the people, and then the kids have to decide who they're going to throw out. And it's a very clinical discussion about, well, this one's quality of life and how long they're going to live. And the demographics vary from story to story. Usually one of the people's a baby. I got it when I was in grad school and said, well, I'm not killing anybody. So we'll throw a rope out the back of the boat. Everybody except the baby swims for an hour. They're tied to the rope. There's only 9 people in the boat. We're good to go. The professor went, well, there's sharks in the water. I said, then there's a shark bag in the boat. If you can make up a shark, I can make up a bag. It's pretend. And everybody in the room went, we can save all the people? Oh! And they came up with a variety of solutions to save all 10 people. But our minds are like computers. You do the job that's put in front of you. Now, I had a friend, his name was Peter Kreeft. He taught at Boston College. He wrote a book called Why Johnny Can't Tell Right from Wrong. And all his kids came in and had the lifeboat story. And they had this very clinical discussion. And then he showed them A Night to Remember, which is the original Titanic movie with Barbara Stanwyck and Clifton Webb. And when the boat, has the romance and whatever, but when the iceberg hits the boat, it's actually true. And so there's the guy who dresses up like the woman and tries to sneak on to the lifeboat. And they find him, and they pull him off. And he says, but I'm a businessman, and I'm rich, and I employ people, and they depend on me, and my life is very important. He said all the things that the kids said when they were analyzing who to throw off the boat. Except when you looked at him, and since the Titanic actually is the lifeboat story, for real, not enough spaces for the people, it wasn't demographic anymore. He was a coward. And you don't like him. And then there's the British Dane, who had the seat on the boat and said, but my husband and I have been married for 60 years. I've lived my whole life with him. I'm going to die with him. And there's a steerage woman with a baby standing there. Give her my seat. And the Navy people didn't want to do it because she was just in steerage. And the woman reminded them that she was, in fact, a dame, so they were going to do what she wanted them to do. And the young mother with the baby gets the seat, and the dame did not. And that's compassion and courage. And what Peter said is when he showed them the movie, they all cried. Because see, now the lifeboat story wasn't clinical. Those were real people who had real lives. Literature touches your soul and your heart. It goes beyond your mind's computer. It reaches you above yourself and makes you see reality, not as just a dysfunctional exercise. And that's what we're taking away when we take away literature. 70% informational radically changes the complexion of what our children will learn in every classroom in the state. Go ahead. Now, in addition to balancing literary and informational, everything is based on a staircase of complexity and text-based answers. Staircase of complexity. What she said is, we want the text to be accessible to the children. They all should be able to read it at a 95% accuracy level. And I said, wait a minute, so if I'm in an 11th grade classroom, but the average reading level is 8th grade, does that mean I can only use 8th grade level text? Isn't that dumbing down? No, it's making it accessible. Okay, last time I looked, 8 was lower than 11, so that's lower. No. You're not understanding this. It's accessible, not lower. Text-based answers, everything that you do has to refer back to the text. So it's informational text, and everything the child answers in every test and every assessment must use the words of the text to move through. And you can't move outside the text when you're teaching. Go ahead. So what does that mean if I control the text? This is the page I wrote. You can see my names at the bottom. I wrote a book on picking a reading curriculum. The candidate, a stick of a woman, sat rigidly in her chair as she addressed the press conference. When asked about her position on the environment, she tersely outlined her program. She lectured the reporters on the changes she would make to education and the tax code. When questions about foreign policy came up, she grimly explained how she would address the situation. At the end of the conference, she stood silently and left the room. Do you like that woman? She's not very nice, is she? A stick of a woman. What are you seeing? Kind of like the witch in the Wizard of Oz, you know? She's a stick, kind of shriveled. Not very polite, not very pleasant. Kind of brusque. Don't like her. Next. What if it said it this way? The candidate, a petite woman, sat confidently in her chair as she addressed the press conference. When asked about her position on the environment, she briefly outlined her program. She carefully listed the changes she would make to education and the tax code. When questions about foreign policy came up, she said the situation was serious and explained how she would address it. At the end of the conference, she smiled quietly before she left the room. Same story, same press conference, same topics. Do you like that woman? A whole lot more. All I did was change the adjectives. If I control the text, I control what you think, just by how I present the information. Go ahead. So, what we got, as an example, was the Gettysburg Address. And what we were told was now text-based. So you can't have a discussion about anything that is not in the text. So don't talk about why was the North fighting the Civil War. Don't talk about a funeral. Don't say, why is equality better than slavery? You can only talk about the words of the Gettysburg Address, which is kind of ironic, because the Gettysburg Address in it says, the world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. And this turns that on its head. The Gettysburg Address doesn't make any sense if it's not presented in context. If you can't talk about the Civil War, and you can't talk about a funeral, the Gettysburg Address does not make sense. And that's how they're supposed to teach it, without context. Go ahead. This is the largest publisher of the GED tests. Now, GED tests are what a lot of homeschoolers use to get a high school diploma, because that's how they get their diploma. This is the largest publisher, and what they said was that they're going to be changing their whole GED test starting in 2014 to make it Common Core compliant in English, math, science, and history. There's that science and history again, although there are no standards. Go ahead. Well, how do they do it? You're going to get a source text and then a question. And in the test, you answer the question, and your answer is graded on how much information you gave and how many statistics you gave using the source text. So the source text becomes kind of important. Go ahead. So the source text on global warming says that global warming temperatures are increasing with two theories, both of which attribute global warming to human industrial activity and population growth. Is that science or propaganda? Now, I'm a child. I'm taking the GED test. My answer is graded on the complexity of my answers and on how well I used the source text. So if I don't agree with that, I'm going to get a lower score because I won't be using the source text, and my answer won't be as complex unless I know all my facts and figures about a different theory out of my head. If I accept this theory, all the information is given to me. So it is a different test. It is more difficult if you don't agree with the political information. Go ahead. This came up today. Homeschoolers face new questions on college admissions. David Coleman is actually the guy who wrote the standards. And now he has moved over. He is now the head of the College Board. That's who administers the SAT tests and the ACT tests. And he said, we're going to make them align with the new standards. Go ahead. So even if your state doesn't sign on, schools are going to have to align their content to the standards, or their kids won't do very well in the SAT tests. And that's your college placement exam. You know, like you have to have a minimum score to get into certain colleges. So if the SAT test moves, even if you're in a state that doesn't comply, the school is still going to have to comply. Go ahead. Proponents say, oh no, this is optional. This is state initiated, it's not mandated. But if I align the SAT and the ACT and the GED, then it doesn't matter whether my state complies or whether I'm in a private school or whether I'm homeschooling my children, I have to comply. Because otherwise I won't do well on those tests. So I won't get a high school diploma, or I won't get a good enough score on the SAT to get into the college of my choice. Go ahead. Well, I mean, really, it's not that politically correct. This is from the Washington Times. This school was in Florida. It's called the Florida Virtual Online School. The course was world history. And the lesson said that the Bible and the Quran both can be used to justify violence. And that terrorists, the poor dears, are people who are risk takers and suffer from low self-esteem. It kind of made a ruckus in that town in Florida when this surfaced and kids came home and said, we just learned that terrorists were people who suffer from low self-esteem. And so it blew up, and the press got involved, and they went and interviewed the school, and what the school said was that the course is in line with Common Core standards and therefore not something that a teacher can alter or change. Does this control curriculum? You betcha. Go ahead. Go ahead. Pennsylvania said in all of our documents that we've aligned our standards with the Common Core, and we're moving everything we're doing for this whole process so that we're all together with all of the states. And we told the feds, we're doing this. There's no question about it. Go ahead. Go ahead. Where did we get them? Well, the Common Core standards came from the Council of Chief State School Officers and the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. What is that? The National Governors Association is a trade association with the 50 governors, but that is not who did the Common Core. The NGA Center for Best Practices is a private, not-for-profit organization that files a separate tax return and has a separate board of directors. So it's a private organization. They get fees for services. They receive some money from the Governors Association. They've received millions of dollars from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop and market the Common Core standards. Go ahead. When we adopted the Common Core standards, every state was told that they had 3 years from the date of adoption to implementation. We adopted the Common Core standards July 1st, 2010. They are being implemented in every school in Pennsylvania July 1st, count to 3, 2013. Now, you've probably heard that the governor in May said, we're backing off of that. No. What he is backing off of is the new regulations. Remember the ones we looked at the beginning that actually didn't change anything? They're backing off of the new regulations. They're not backing off of implementing. They can't, because they took money. And when they took money, they said, this will be implemented July 1st, 2013. So it is starting this year. They are training teachers across the state in how to implement this, that the portal is in place, the assessments are in place. They are moving forward with this, in spite of what you're seeing is a lot of window dressing right now. The House of Representatives in Pennsylvania last week unanimously passed a resolution urging the state board to back off of. The state board in response said, well, we're going to pull out of the assessment consortia. That doesn't mean we're going to change the assessments. We're just going to pull out of the consortia. We're going to rewrite some of the technical things in the Chapter 4 regulations, but they're not stopping doing this. Now, there is a package of 5 pieces of legislation that are currently circulating in the Pennsylvania House. One says these can't apply to homeschoolers. One says we need a study to determine this, and the study should last until November of 2014, and you can't implement until then, which is kind of cool. One said that we can't share any data with the federal government, and there's 2 more that I can't think of off the top of my head. Those 5 packages, bills, are currently Representative Tallman is the prime sponsor. He's looking for co-sponsors. So whoever your state rep is, those are laws, and they will work. So contact your state rep and ask him to sign on to Representative Tallman's package of anti-Common Core legislation.
How do you spell that name?
Tallman. He's from Adams County. Go ahead. Now, I decided to look and see where could I find, where is this national? So this is the National Common Core website. If you Google Common Core, you'll find it. What does it say? Go ahead. It says that everything on the website is the property of this NGA Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Go ahead. And again. It says they can refuse anybody access to the site. So you're only supposed to be able to access the standards to use them for the purposes that they want you to use them for, like promoting them. So if they don't like how you're using their information, they can deny you access to their site. I'm waiting. Go ahead. Go ahead. They said that you can own, they're copyrighted. Not only do they own them, they've copyrighted the standards, and you have to have a license to use them. Go ahead. Go ahead. They said they have to be acknowledged as the sole owners and developers of the standards. I thought every state wrote them. They wrote them. They're the sole owners and developers, and everybody has to say that unless you're a state. And if the state adopts them, the state doesn't have to tell anybody that somebody else owns the standards. States are exempted from that. Everybody else, go ahead, has to say that the National Governors Association Center and the Council of Chief State School Officers are the authors and the publishers of the Common Core standards, and they were copyrighted in 2010. Go ahead. Now, as this has been heating up, other people have been jumping in. This is a letter from ExxonMobil. The lobbyist, the Pennsylvania lobbyist for ExxonMobil, actually wrote to Tom Corbett in May, and in the letter what he said was, ExxonMobil loves Pennsylvania's Common Core standards, and you shouldn't listen to all the people in Pennsylvania who don't like them. And can we remind you, we donate $3.3 million to charitable things in Pennsylvania, and we have lots of employees in Pennsylvania, and we really like the Common Core standards. So a Texas corporation is telling Pennsylvania's governor what he should do with Pennsylvania's children. Texas isn't a Common Core state. They said no to the standards. Why would this corporation think they would have the right to tell Pennsylvania parents what should be done with Pennsylvania's children? Go ahead. Go ahead. Now, Pennsylvania told the feds that they're aligning all the components. If you look at the very last line, it says each of 13 academic areas. I thought this was just English and math. 13 academic areas. So there are other standards, they just haven't shown them to us yet. But they all already exist. Because you couldn't have aligned to a non-existent standard. Go ahead. And go ahead. Pennsylvania said they're working with post-secondary institutions to have them change their programs and their admissions so that they integrate the standards. And if the colleges don't want to do it, they'll mandate adjustments or improvements. So this doesn't stop at high school. They'll make the colleges comply as well. Go ahead. How will they do that? Go ahead. They're going to revise the content of the PSSA so that the PSSA is attached to the standards. Go ahead. And again. They're going to make the Keystone assessments using the standards, and then they're going to tell the colleges to make the Keystone assessments be their placement exams. So you won't see how achievement comes down because there's no place out of the system. I own a business. I'm going to the bank for a loan. And the bank says, okay, but I need to know how your business is doing. And I say, oh, okay, well, I set my standards for success for my business, And then I taught all my employees how to do those standards. And then I wrote the test to see how my employees did. And then I administered the test to my employees to see how they were doing. And then I scored the test that I wrote and I administered. And now I'm telling you how they did on the test that I wrote and I administered and I scored. And you know, my employees all got an A. So our business is very successful. And if you were a bank, would you give anybody a loan based on that information? Of course not. You would say, how about an outside audit? In this system, the state is setting the standards. The state is delivering the curriculum. The state is writing the assessments. The state is giving the assessments. The state is scoring the assessments. And now the state will report to you the results of the scores of the assessments that they have written and given. And we're supposed to trust that that's accurate. Nobody would give a business a loan on that kind of information. Why would we entrust our children to that? And can the state skew the assessment? Yes, in a number of ways. When the PSSA first came out, I actually went to the department and read all the tests. Now, the PSSA is a matrix assessment. Did you ever play Chinese checkers? There's 10 marbles on your team. There's really 10 forms of each test. So I read all 10 forms, and in one of the forms, in one of the grades, was a story about a child who found a wallet with money in it, and the question was, and then the story was about, what did he do with the money? So now you get to the questions. What did the child find? A wallet. What was in the wallet? Money. If you found a wallet with money in it, would you keep the money? And I turned the test around to the undersecretary and said, so do you read better if you say yes? Or do you read better if you say no? Or are you not testing reading? Did you just test the honesty of the children of Pennsylvania on a standardized test that had their name on it? And no parent knew it. When it's an inside test, you have no control. You don't even have knowledge of what's going on in this picture. Go ahead. Go ahead. Pennsylvania said by 2013, they will be able to track students from birth to the workforce, womb to tomb. It's 2013. Go ahead. We're one of the only states to integrate early childhood and all of the post-secondary data. Congratulations to us. Now, do you remember those 12 elements? Remember that chart we had with the 12 elements? This chart is the 12 elements. I want you to look at the middle column as we scroll down. Go ahead. Met. Go ahead. You're going to go through quick. Met. 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 Go ahead. Met. 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 Go ahead. Met and met. We told the federal government we have all 12 of the elements in the data system operational, ready to go. Go ahead. Go ahead. Now we need to expand it. We got $14 million in 2010 so that we could connect to the workforce. Remember in 2009 we hadn't been there yet? So now we are, because in 2010 we got $14 million to do it. And we're collecting data on early childhood educators, not just the children, but the teachers, because we need to make sure that they're compliant and willing to go along with the program. Now, in 2010, the Secretary of Education went to the Sustainability Summit. And this is what he said. Go ahead. He said, through Race to the Top, we've done an avalanche of reform. Go ahead. Go ahead. He said, this is the first time that the Department of Education, mind you, is taking a leadership role in educating the next generation of green citizens. Go ahead. And go ahead. Educators have a central role. They'll teach children about how the climate is changing. They'll explain the science behind climate change. They have a role in preparing students for jobs in the green economy. Go ahead. I promise you, the Department of Education will be a committed partner in the national effort to build a more environmentally literate and responsible society. Go ahead. We at the department are energized in joining these leaders, the sustainability leaders, in their commitment to preparing today's students to participate in the green economy and be well educated about the science of sustainability. We must advance the sustainability movement through education. What he said in his remarks that I didn't highlight was that President Clinton had been really committed to sustainability, but since he didn't put it in the schools, all the adults were too recalcitrant. They didn't go along. But if we put it in the schools, then we'll make this move forward. So this agenda will move forward if we force it down into the schools. Now, whether you agree with the sustainability movement or not, how is the U.S. Department of Education, if the federal government has no role in education, being able to promise that this is going to happen in the classrooms of America, unless in fact they do have a role in education and they are affecting local curriculum. This is a promise you can't keep. I couldn't even say if you didn't know you were changing curriculum. Go ahead. They issued grants to 5 states to develop career pathways that would support the green economy. In the 1990s, it was called School to Work. We pulled kids out of the schools and we had them shadow people in workforces for a portion of the day. And they were doing, quote, meaningful activities in a workforce, which when you think about it, how meaningful can a 15-year-old actually be in a work environment? They don't have any skills. What they said was they were on career tracks. Now they're on career pathways. And Education Week did an article and said, now these are not the career tracks of the 1990s. These are career pathways, which are entirely different than tracks. Go ahead. And go ahead. Our commitment has to be even more than that. They have to have the knowledge they need to be green citizens. Go ahead. All students are going to have a curriculum that includes environmental literacy. Go ahead. And go ahead. Right now, preparing our students to be good environmental citizens is some of the most important work that we can do. Go ahead. And go ahead. Because education and sustainability are the keys to our economic future. Well, how are they going to do that? Go ahead. This is, remember, the Council of Chief State School Officers, they own one of the owners of the Common Core Standards. This is their new document, Knowledge, Skills, and Dispositions. It's dated February of 2013. Go ahead. And go ahead. It says the Common Core Standards are foundational, they're essential, but they're not sufficient. We need to do more. Go ahead. And go ahead. We need to deal with dispositions, mindsets, so that we can make sure our kids are successful. What are those? Go ahead. And go ahead. Those are agency, initiative, resilience, adaptability, leadership, ethical behavior, and civic responsibility, because we really want Washington teaching about ethical behavior, right? Social awareness and empathy and self-control. And this is what we're going to teach the children. Go ahead, and go ahead. It's called College, Career, and Citizenship Readiness, and that's what states should have as the goal of their educational systems. Go ahead, and go ahead. In order to do that, we have to redesign not just the education, but the support services. Remember those extra interventions that the school districts are going to have to pay for? From their earliest learning forward. That's why we're collecting data on early childhood educators. Go ahead, and go ahead. Every child has to master those dispositions so that we can track, and to know that we have to be able to track their individual learning progression. How do we do that? Go ahead, and go ahead. We create an individual learning plan. Sometimes they're called IEPs, for every child, and we do it online. Remember, the child in the classroom can't hang up the phone. So it's an online system, it's college, career, and citizenship readiness, and we're tracking to make sure they comply from the earliest movement, earliest educational experience forward. And President Obama is now putting together his plans for universal pre-kindergarten. Go ahead. Well, we're going to have to change our assessments to make sure that they combine measurements of the knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Is this new? Remember the PSSA? Do you read better if you say yes? Do you read better if you say no? They've been testing these things for quite some time. Now we're just out in the open about it. And we're changing all the Common Core. We're going to mandate and all of the student assessments to include everything we need to have college, career, and citizenship readiness so that we have control of what you know, can do, and believe at every level. Now that's a lot of bad news, isn't it? Go ahead. I thought we should end on good news. This is my granddaughter. Now, as you heard, I have 6 children, 5 of them are boys, and this is my first grandchild, and my son and his wife had the very good taste to give me a granddaughter. All those boys. This is Addie. She's 7 months old now. Why am I showing you her picture? Well, because she's adorable, but also because every one of you has one of those in your life. Maybe it's your child, or a grandchild, or a niece, or a nephew, or a neighbor, but we all have one of those in our lives. Imagine that face with a target on it, because everything I just told you is aimed at her, and the her that's in your life. And the only person that those folks have to defend them is you. You're the line in the sand. We parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors, we are the line in the sand to defend each of those faces. Will that be easy? No. There's tons of money involved on the other side of this. Is it possible? In one of these events, a gentleman stood up and said, it's a lot of women that are like doing a lot of the speaking and running around in this. Why is that? That there's so many women out there. And I said, well, let me put it to you this way. You know how we've all heard that fathers will die for their children? And he said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, mothers will kill. You stand against the mothers and grandmothers of America at your peril. And it is the women who are standing up. And no disrespect to you gentlemen, would you rather see an angry mama bear or an angry papa bear? You'd run away from the angry mama bear. The parents of America are more than capable of standing up to this challenge. And we are more than capable of defending our children. It's kind of funny, people keep talking about don't awaken the sleeping giant. Yeah, go after the kids. Every parent, every mom and dad in America is about to wake up. It's our job to let them know that the faces with the targets look like that. It's our job to say, not with our children, you're not. 20 years ago, I fought this fight with outcome-based education. Then my kids were little, and so I was defending my children. Now I'm defending my grandchildren. And as I told you, I'm Irish. There's no point in being Irish if you can't be more stubborn than everybody that you know. I am serving notice on these departments. Over my dead body, will you do this to my granddaughter? And I call on every one of you to join me in that pledge. We are not fighting for the future of America anymore. We are fighting for the very souls of our children. And they are depending on us not to lose. This is a war we must win. And I am counting on you to join me in making sure that it is a war that we do win. Thank you.